This is the Global Travel Channel podcast show, and I am your host, Mark Philpott. Hello and welcome back if you are a regular listener to the show. If you're a first timer, thank you for coming along. There's so much for you to see and to check out on the Global Travel Channel. Just go to our website, www.globaltravelchannel.com. Get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way here, folks. We have the 2019-2020 Global Travel Channel Podcast Show Awards going on at the moment. That's a mouthful. And you can vote, yes. So if you love today's guest, all you've got to do is go to the website, hit the awards button and vote for today's guest. If you go over and listen to some other podcast episodes and you think, wow, that guest was really inspiring or motivating or educational, I want to vote for them in the awards, you can do so. There's lots of different categories there. You get one vote per category. And on June the 9th, 2020, I'm going to be announcing the winners of the Global Travel Channel Podcast Awards. First time this year doing the awards, and there's going to be lots of interesting outcomes, I can tell you that. Now, on the show, I get to talk to people all across the world about their amazing travel experiences. We have a huge, diverse group of guests on the show, so it's not just people talking about their family holidays. No. We get deep and personal with my guests. We find out what makes them tick, what have they learnt from their travels, how's it changed them as a person. And for those people that have been travelling the world for a long time, like my guest today, we're going to find out how the world has changed over time. And are we more connected or disconnected? That's going to be a bit of a theme for today's show. So why don't we go over and meet my guest today? Her name is Kerrie Phipps. Kerrie, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show.
Thank you, Mark. So excited to be here.
Now, international speaker, leadership coach and author. How are you today as all of those people?
Great. Not doing as much writing as I'd like to be, but never mind.
Do you ever have a mistaken identity with all those labels?
No, because I'm pretty much just me in any of those places.
Fantastic. Now, whereabouts in the world are you talking to us all from today?
I'm in Dubbo, Central West New South Wales, Australia. So about 6 hours drive from Sydney.
6 hours inland from Sydney.
Yes.
So for people, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to give you 90 seconds to spruce Dubbo to the world. Tell us all about Dubbo in 90 seconds and what the world can learn about Dubbo.
Well, Dubbo is world famous for the Western Plains Taronga Zoo, and you've got to come to the zoo. You feel like you've literally travelled around the world as you see all the animals in the different, like you feel like you're in the African savannah, and then you can be in Australian nature and have all the kangaroos hopping around, and it's very, very cool. But we also have like extraordinary cafes, like world-class tastes, and such an international culture also. There's every kind of food, there's so many beautiful people from around the world, and you can be in the middle of town and then 5 minutes later you can be out looking at the stars at night or walking through nature, beautiful cycling tracks and walking tracks, and yeah, come to Dubbo.
Wow, fantastic. So there you go, everybody. If you're listening in and you're putting together your Australian itinerary for your next trip down under, make sure you add Dubbo to that. Is it called Dub Vegas?
Some people call it that.
Yeah, I read that the other day somewhere that it's got a bit of a slang going on with Dub Vegas. I thought, where did that come from? I thought Bris Vegas was the only one. Also, obviously, Australia wants to turn itself into little mini versions of Las Vegas. That's what's going on.
Maybe it's just, to add or to express that we do have an excitement factor.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'd rather say go to Dubbo for other reasons than trying to be Dub Vegas, but go and check it out.
It's not in my vocabulary, but that's okay. We're all different.
Now, I ask all of my guests to have the opportunity to dedicate their episode to someone special in their life. So who would you like to dedicate your show to today?
Oh, well, at the risk of offending others, because we're talking about travel, I thought of my son, Ethan, who I was actually pregnant with when I did my very first international trip. And now I've been to maybe about 18 countries in his 19 years of life. So, he's a champion and he's not here now. He's on an Air Force base a long way from here, like 11
Right.
hours drive.
Right.
So I'm thinking of him.
Okay, fantastic. Ethan, I'd like to get you on the show because I'd like to know what that first trip was like with Mum. And tell my audience what you remember of it all.
He was about 10 centimetres long, but he
There you
did,
go.
when he was a kid, did claim it as, like the first place that he went to.
Okay, well, that's a lovely dedication to sending that out to your son. So I hope he sits down on the, it's Air Force Base, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I hope he sits down on the Air Force Base and has a good listen to what Mum's about to show. He might learn some things about his mother today that he didn't know.
He might be
Yeah.
cringing already. But I've loved being able to take him to different countries at different ages and just seeing the impact that it's had on his life. And like travel, as you've picked up already, is something that I'm passionate about for multiple reasons.
Yeah, it must be something special for a mother to see their children grow through those experiences. I unfortunately never had that experience, but I guess it's something really, it's memories you've got forever, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you love conversations that create connections. I know that much about you. So let's do that today for my audience, because I think there's a lot of things that we can uncover. And the first one is to let my audience know that you've just started your own podcast show journey, Connect with Confidence, which kicked off last month in April. And how are you finding the podcast journey so far?
Well, kind of easy, because my husband is really doing everything and I just get to have conversations, which I love. And he takes the recording and he does all the bits and pieces. And then I just need to remember to tell people like, oh yeah, and I've got a podcast. But I think it's such a great way to make more connections and introduce more really insightful, amazing people in my world to a wider audience. So I'm really thrilled to be able to do that.
Have you been a person that's been into podcast listening for some time? Are you putting on the earphones and listening to all sorts of things?
Yeah, probably several years. I don't know really when I started. But you can just learn anything and pick up all kinds of insights and ideas and philosophies, and it just really broadens your world. So you can really, travel the world while you're walking along your neighbourhood walking track.
Good luck with your show, and I've already listened in, so I can tell you already a little bit about your show, but I want everybody else to check it out. And I'm going to put all the links to Kerrie's sites in the show notes today, folks. So if you want to check out Kerrie's podcast show, which I recommend you do, then check it out through the links. Now, Kerrie, first time with me on the show, so all I can say is expect the unexpected. There will be things that come at you that you weren't expecting today. And every now and again, I'll throw in a little quirky question to see if you're on your toes. And let's start off with one, yeah? How about we do that? So what's been the scariest moment in your life?
I've grown up with scary moments. My dad would always throw me out of the comfort zone and just like, jump off here, I'll catch you. And
I guess in the context of you've traveled a lot, has there been something that's happened on one of your trips that, frightened you a bit? Put you outside of your comfort zone, as you just mentioned?
But I do remember a moment in Brunei airport, and I just landed, and the client that I was speaking for had sent me my visa literally 10 minutes before I got on the flight from Singapore to Brunei. And so I didn't look at it closely, but I was like, phew, there it is. Then I get to the airport, and to Brunei airport, and they said, well, you can't come in. And I'm saying, excuse me? And they said, well, your visa is for 2 days, but your flights show that you're here for 3 days. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, the client booked it, so, they did the visa, so can you please do that? Please, just contact them. But, I had this moment of like, like this has never occurred to me before, that like you could be stranded in an airport, and my mind went to Tom Hanks, stuck in the airport. And I was like, interesting. And then my next thought was, I'm glad my husband's not here with me because he doesn't deal with unexpected things like that very well, or as well, I should say.
So you got in okay, though?
Yeah, I did. They rang the client, and then they said, yeah, you need to pay $20 cash. And I said, oh, I don't have Brunei cash. Can I please pay with MasterCard? No, it has to be cash. And I was like, okay, I don't have Brunei cash. And they said, do you have Singapore cash? And I went, and so I had $30 in my wallet that I just thought, oh well, I guess I'll use that on my next trip to Singapore, but I could use that in Brunei airport. Yeah,
that came in handy then, didn't it? Now, what star sign are you?
Sagittarius.
There you go. So I do this a lot on the show. We kind of put in people into boxes and say, right, Sagittarians, yes, you love traveling, and you're actually in the top 75% quartile for travelers around the world, Sagittarians. So there's a little hopeless fact for you. Now, let's start off by talking about travel over 100 years ago. Do you know how your ancestors came to Australia?
Yes, there were... Well, actually, Mark Philpott, my great-grandmother came from England as a war bride after World War One because she married Arthur Philpott from Australia.
Really?
Yes.
Goodness gracious.
Yes.
Isn't it a small world?
It is a small world. And then so she had 4 daughters, the eldest of which was my grandmother, and she married a World War II soldier.
Yep.
And her family went back to England, but my granddad, his family came from Ireland and England. Yeah, so...
Have you done much digging into the old family ancestry?
Not really further back than World War One, although my son has gone back a bit further and seen that we have some connection to the French, actually on both sides, my husband's and mine. But yeah, there was royalty on my husband's side way, way back.
Yeah, the reason I asked was I'm really fascinated by all the different forms of travel, and often we forget about the history of travel and how we all started to be where we are today in the world.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know whether you've done any digging on that of your family history and how they travelled to Australia.
Yeah. Well, so my grandma was actually in utero. She was conceived in England to this new war bride, and then they travelled out to Australia when she was pregnant. So that would not have been a nice journey.
No.
I went to Thailand when I was pregnant, and modern travel, it was fine, but being on a ship for 6 weeks or something when you're pregnant, and I think a lot of the women coming out with their Australian soldiers were pregnant.
You've had a couple of experience that you've already shared with me where travel for newborns has been very relevant in your life. Can you remember your first overseas trip?
So I was 26 and pregnant with Ethan, but and I don't think I took him overseas again until he was probably 3 or 4. Yeah, he was 4. But yeah, I grew up traveling in Australia with my parents. Yeah.
So those trips were like school holiday trips and all that sort of stuff around the country?
Yeah, and long drives. So we would drive from Gilgandra, the farm is 1 hour from Dubbo. Yeah. And it's halfway between Melbourne and Brisbane. So for people who might have done that road trip or look on Google Maps and see how far it is from Melbourne to Brisbane, it's pretty much like 22 hours. People actually do the whole thing, but because we're halfway, we could travel to Queensland, go to the Gold Coast, and it would be, like 11 hours probably at least, because the roads weren't as great, and we're in a hot Holden Kingswood, no air conditioning, leather seats, just not pleasant, but that was just what we did. And now people would say to me, oh my goodness, you're going to Asia again, you're going to Singapore or Philippines, and I'm like, it's really not that far. It's like an 8-hour flight like we used to do. Yeah,
compared to what you did in the car, there's nothing.
That's right.
Yeah. Did you have a family song that you used to listen to on the radio or something in the car?
No, I can't think of a family song. Probably like Aussie songs.
Aussie songs, yeah.
But you know what popped into my head, if I'm going to be completely honest, is this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine.
Oh, right, okay. You were singing that in the back seat, were you?
Quite possibly.
Oh, there you go. What about snack food in the car? What did the family have going on as far as snack food on these long trips?
I don't know that we had a tradition. Oh, okay. There's 2. So my grandma, my dad's mum, she always had these, they were kind of a rectangle boiled sweet. Like they were hard and they were beautiful and they were wrapped in paper. So they just seemed elegant. But then I think of my dad, and he's big on fruit. And so we'd pull up on the side of the road to buy fruit from people's stalls. And to this day, I really do not appreciate rock melon. I have had rock melon in Cambodia that I was like, that was actually not too bad. That didn't really taste like rock melon. But I tried it in India just recently, and I went, no, I really still don't like rock melon, because Dad would just buy trays of it, and then, it would get a bit moldy, because you just don't eat it all fast enough, and he'd just say, oh, it's just a bit of mold, that's all. And I'm like, oh, it just smells so pungent.
I guess it was a lot better than having durian in the car, though.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
True.
absolutely.
That was my durian. You love it or hate it.
Did those family trips give you a kind of a taste for travelling and an appetite to get out there and see more of not only of Australia but the world?
I would say more than travel, it's about meeting people. And Dad, like, we could be on the coast. I remember one time at Bateman's Bay, New South Wales South Coast, and Dad came back to our apartment and he said, "Oh, we're going out on someone's yacht, an ocean-going yacht." It's like, "Oh, okay. Like, how did that happen?" "Oh, I just got chatting with him and he invited us aboard." And Dad would just meet the most extraordinary people doing interesting things, and he's so interested in them, and they just would invite him along. So we had all kinds of adventures from simply talking to strangers.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're going to get into that because that's led to, present day stuff as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Dad and grandparents, big influence.
That first overseas trip you took, how did that kind of change your whole view of the world at that time? Or did it?
Well, I think it did, and coupled with being a new mum not long after. Yeah, it was very much a turning point. I think, like, I'd wanted to go overseas. It wasn't a big thing growing up, although watching Anne of Green Gables, I think most girls want to go to Prince Edward Island. You've got to go to Canada after you've read Anne of Green Gables. So that was there, but also one of Mum's aunties, one of the 4 girls, went back to England, and so Mum's got cousins over there. So I was always interested in going to England, which didn't actually happen until 2019.
So it's interesting how those first trips kind of give you the taste for more. Now you've become a leadership coach and you've been doing that for over 15 years. What inspired you to get into that line of business?
Well, actually, I crashed and burned. So after that first Thailand trip, then I had Ethan, then I kept working. And so going to Thailand was actually taking teenagers over there, and we were like teaching English in the universities. And, it was like an experience for us, and it was service to others. So the 3 years later, I went back with another bunch of young people. My husband stayed home with Ethan, and I picked up a bug there and on the way home, and I just became really, really sick and just tried to like push through, and my neck was swollen up like a watermelon, and the doctors insisted it was mumps, and they said the blood test will show that it's mumps, and then the blood test came back and they went, "Well, it's not mumps," and I'm like, "And it is?" And they're like, "Well, it's not mumps." So they couldn't diagnose it because it was just some random illness that I picked up in Asia. And I really pushed my way through that year. Like, I had about a month off where I just couldn't go anywhere. And then, the swelling kind of settled, but and I was already kind of at the point of burnout when I went on that trip. It had just been a really intense year, and I was working I was available almost 24/7 because I'm working with young people and families. They don't know that, they might be the 100th person that day to call and say, "Where's my teenager?" I'm like, "I don't know." I don't keep tabs on them all. I was just doing my best. And yeah, so by the end of the following year, I literally couldn't function. I hit the wall one day where I couldn't get off the lounge. And I said to my husband, "I just want to go to bed." And he said, "That's okay, go." And I'm like, "But I can't." Like, my body and my brain just were not connecting. And so that was kind of the end of my work with the young people. And yeah, I was pretty much in isolation for, a good 6 months. I was sleeping 20 hours a day. And it was a very lonesome time. And it was a very, resetting kind of time where I go, so where do I go from here? And how can I more effectively help people? How do I help people without burning myself out? And, people were not talking about burnout back then. And, it's not even something I've really talked about on podcasts. It's like, I'm still figuring out what parts of my story are relevant for various platforms. But, you said you'd ask me all kinds of things today. So I was like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But I came across coaching and I went, oh my gosh, that's me. And then I would tell people and they'd say, oh my gosh, Kerrie, that's you. But what is it? Because coaching was so new to Australia then.
So was there anyone in particular that was an inspiration for you to get into coaching? Did you see somebody? Did you go to an event or something?
Well, I I started Googling it because it literally just popped into my head one day when I was going for a walk, and I was just like, God, where do I go from here? Like, how do I more effectively help people? And so I started thinking, like, coaching, like, what is that? That sounds like me. And yeah, so you go to Google for help, and I found, there's a couple of American coaching schools, and there was, in Australia, there was Results Coaching Systems. And as I read their website, I just went, oh, this is like words from my journal. Like, it just was so, it was resonating with me. And so I went, okay, I'm going to Sydney. And this is like how I have done a lot of travel. I just go, I need to go there. It's just a sense that I need to go, I need to connect with these people, I need to do this thing. And my granddad, my mum's parents lived in Sydney. And so he came to this information night with me, and I didn't know, but he'd done Dale Carnegie training, and he was a star in the insurance sales world until he had a brain tumor, and had surgery and then couldn't speak for months or years, had to relearn. But yeah, so he came to that night with me at 80 something, and he was so fired up about it as well, which was really lovely because I didn't expect that. He was just being my bodyguard going into the city at night. Yeah. So that was the event where everything they said was, again, straight out of my journal. And so I just like threw myself into the training, and I just started coaching people because I would tell them what it was all about, and they'd say, oh, I'd like to do that. And yeah, and it just went on from there. And then people would say, like, how do you build an international business from Dubbo? And I'm like, well, I guess I just have conversations, because I had nothing to invest in marketing. It's like, I don't know how to build a business, but I just know that I need to coach people because it transformed me. I worked with a coach as well, and I still had, I had to know, am I capable of this? Because my brain had crashed so much. I struggled when I was sick. So even 6 months earlier, I couldn't read a whole article. Like a paragraph I would struggle with. So I was like, I don't even know if I can do this training. But it was so experiential, and it shifted my thinking in extraordinary ways.
So it was really the stimulus to get you out of your dark period, wasn't it, by the sound of it? Yeah. Now, when you say coaching, what specific areas were you wanting to coach people in?
Well, it's really coaching people in their thinking. Like, it's not, I know a lot of coaches are like a health coach or a fitness coach, finance coach or business coach or whatever, but it's really personal coaching for, a business person or leader, because I have no agenda except theirs. So if they say, I want to be a better leader, and I want to be a better parent, and, I want to write this book. I mean, I was coaching people to write books before I'd written my own books, because it's not about me and my experience and expertise, but it's about tapping into theirs. So I just would ask them questions, about, and we've got a process, but would really help them to get clear on what they wanted. So because of their clarity, then they've got the confidence to move forward and ask questions and do the research they needed, and they just did extraordinary things. But it was the questions. I have to be great at asking questions and listening and just being in the moment, and they came out with the most extraordinary things, and they surprised themselves. And yeah, I was constantly surprised as well. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Didn't know it was going to go there.
Yeah, that's great. That's a talent, because I was just talking to someone the other day about this, and we were having the conversation around, have you noticed how many coaches there are on Facebook these days that are popping up and blah, blah, blah? And this person said to me, I would never use a coach who hasn't done whatever it is they're selling themselves. And you've just opened up a door to a new line of thinking on that, because it's right. The answers lie within, I guess, in terms of helping those people unlock their own secrets, right?
Yes, and people have said that to me too. And, and I sort of thought about that. Like, when I started, I walked into that first coach training weekend in Sydney, and I looked around the room and I was like, I'm the youngest, I'm the least adequate, I'm the least professional, I'm the youngest. And it was just like I'm the least of all of these. But as I asked questions that unlocked insight, that didn't matter. And it was when someone from Perth asked me to coach him, and I talked to my coach mentor, and I was like, but he's the MD of this like massive company, and he's like jet setting around Australia like every week. And she's like, Kerrie, you are the perfect coach for him. And I was like, really? And it was incredible. Like, and he had extraordinary outcomes because I could stay out of his world and not have an opinion, but just ask him, you know, everyone else's opinions aside, what do you really think? You know, and what's your gut telling you? And to have that quiet space that's not influenced by anyone else's thinking is really profound. So that's the kind of coaching that I love as well, because I know that I can think it through, and someone will ask me questions that mean I can see something that I hadn't seen before because I've been too busy or too influenced by others.
Yeah, like your ancestors' trip to Australia. You've never been asked that before, have you?
Yeah, that's right. I'm like, oh no, family history.
So let's go back to that first experience in Sydney and going to that training, and you know, the years have rolled on and you are where you are now. How has coaching evolved over that time? What have been the main changes within the industry?
Well, there has been an explosion since then of a whole lot of different kinds of coaching, and you know, this is a bit of a hot button for me, I have to say, because because I feel like it's not pure coaching, and it's like, could you call it mentoring or could you call it training? Because I feel like if you're bringing your expertise as a, you know, fitness guru or a whatever the field is, then maybe you're actually doing more training than coaching. But then coaching, that's the word that it was when I learned, and now, you know, we talk about brain-based coaching, or, you know, a neuro leadership style of coaching. It's like being brain friendly. So I think there's just so many things that have been called coaching, and also people have, you know, just gone. I've met people and I go, oh, you're a coach, like, where did you train? And they're like, oh, I just read a book, you know, I've got life experience. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're just looking at it from a different angle.
Right, brilliant. Now, look, thanks for sharing that, because I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to learn a little bit about your background when it came to that, because this is the subject that's taking you all over the world to do different things as a coach. And I wanted to get, I guess, transition now and segue ourselves into, how did you first start getting gigs overseas as a coach? How did that evolve for you?
Well, because I'm coaching inspiring people, then articles started to fall out. And when I was working with probably my second coach, I worked with a different coach each year to just pull the best out of me and stop me hiding, because I could just hide in that, like, oh, I'm not good enough. So I was working with this coach, and I said, you know, I want to unleash the writer within. You know, I feel like I'm writing in my head. I wake up and I'm writing, but I'm not putting pen to paper because, you know, I've got all these conversations in my head that are not helpful. And she said, like, what would be amazing? And I just went, well, it would be amazing to, like, actually write an article for a magazine. And it felt like so far off, but literally within a couple of weeks, I'd met the owner of a magazine and her editor, and been invited to a wine tasting night that they were doing. Then they asked to interview me, and the editor finished the interview with, well, can you please be my coach? And I was like, wow, I'd love to. Let's, you know, have another meeting about that. And she said, can you write for us every month? And I was like, what? So, you know, I sent her an article that was inspired by one of my clients. I jumped in the car and drove there like 5 minutes downtown and sat in her office. And she just looked at me expectantly, and I said, well, you know, I've sent you the article, but I just came to see, do I need to start again? What do I need to do differently? And she said, it's great. I've already sent it to the designer for layout. And I was like, what? And then she said, so you just keep doing that. She said, you know, do this for a year. And she said, there's a book. And I was like, like me? Yeah. So, yeah, a few years down the track, there's multiple books and many articles. And, you know, like my coaching clients, you know, I surprised myself.
So a lot of self-belief came out of this journey by the sound of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of encouragement from others. Yeah, so the books, like once you start writing books, then people say, oh, can you come and talk about this? So it really was 2015, and I'd been working with some other coaches who were doing, you know, speaker training and coaching, and then I was invited to the Australian Professional Speakers Association conference, but I was also, that was in Canberra that year, and I was also asked to speak in Sydney on the same weekend, and I was looking at, can I kind of squeeze both in? And then I was invited by someone I mentored years before through the coaching world. I'd run a call actually every month called Coaches Connect, and this is back in the days before Zoom. It was just a teleconference, and I did that for remote coaches, so they could call in from anywhere, where the time zone worked for them, but it was pretty much Asia Pacific. And every month for 7 years, I had coaches calling in. And one of them added me to the Facebook group for the Asia professional speakers. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't see myself as fitting in there, but I was like, this is cool. And I'm reading some blogs by some of the speakers. And so when this Sydney one wasn't the best timing, I looked at the Singapore event, and it was actually the price of the ticket and the flights were cheaper than the Australian one. And I went, oh my gosh. Because I'm like, let me just see what Qantas has got to say about this. Look at the flight sale. I'm like, oh my word, I could go to Singapore. And my husband goes, yep, looks like you are. So I was like, yeah. And so then I contacted someone. So I went to their 2015 convention, which was amazing and like really pivotal. But I also had contacted a businessman who I had mentored when he was a new coach, probably 8 years before. I said, I'm coming to Singapore. We can finally meet face to face. And he said, I'll gather my team to sit at your feet. I was like, oh, that's an unusual thing to say. So I messaged an Aussie friend who had moved to Singapore, and I said, does this sound like Singaporean or biblical? And he goes, oh, I think both. I was like, okay. Anyway, so, and then the other way he referred to that night was a fireside chat, which I also thought was really interesting, being that Singapore's so hot, you don't really have a fireside. But so I said yes to that, and there was going to be 20 people in the room. And I got there half an hour early, which is, quite appropriate for an event like that in Australia. But the room was already half full. There's like 50 people there. And then they like packed in, and they were standing right at the back, and there's like 100 people in this room. And their social media about the event was crazy. Like they were just taking so many photos with me in the book and each other in the book and posting it all out there. And that was my third book, which is called Do Talk to Strangers, How to Connect with Anyone Anywhere. And I think these Singaporeans were just like, what? Do talk to strangers? We don't talk to strangers. And they loved it. And because of that social media, I had requests to speak in Singapore again for Shell head office. And actually one of the girls was in the room that night. And then somebody from the Philippines reached out and said, will you come to the Philippines? I'd like to represent you, and we'll do a tour of the different islands and do your Connect with Confidence, Do Talk to Strangers workshops. And I was like, wow, I'd never really thought about the Philippines. And my husband goes, I've always wanted to go to the Philippines. Oh, okay. So that was the start of like 7 trips there in a matter of like 2 years. And I just love the people there.
So was the Singapore trip your first kind of leadership coaching trip out of Australia?
Well, actually, in 2006, I found myself in a role that I was supporting results coaching systems because, I was friends with the guys in head office, and, I was just so keen. I just did all the training, as I mentioned earlier. And the national sales manager left, and I said, send me some names. I'm happy to follow up. I don't want anyone to say that, results didn't get back to them. And, so they're forwarding me all these emails. And so I'm calling people and telling them, my experience. And unbeknownst to me, I'm making record sales of the coach training because I was just so passionate about it. And, it was an amazing training as well. But then David Rock, the founder and CEO, said, I want Kerrie to come to Singapore with me, or to meet me in Singapore, because he was coming back from the US. And I was like, yes. And head office in Sydney is going, no, let us stay focused on Australia. And of course, I didn't want the name of National Sales Manager, because they tried to put me in that role. And they said, you're actually doing the role. And I was like, it doesn't sound like me. And they said, well, could you be the National Coach Training Consultant? I was like, okay, that's fine. Wasn't so much pressure. And so with this one trip to Singapore, which was literally 2 short nights and 1 full day, introducing David and, sharing my experience of the coaching training and, to about 100 Singaporean business people. With that, I took on the whole Asia Pacific region. So then I was consulting with India as they were opening, in Dubai, the Middle East, and then America. They wanted to know, what's the Kerrie Phipps way of selling, because, she's making the record sales down under. And I was like, oh, I don't know that there's a process. I think I'm just being me and being passionate and being interested in the people I'm talking to. So yeah, that was amazing. So that trip to Singapore was actually pivotal, because just before the event started, like, all the chairs are out, people are still outside, and I turned to David and I said, "Are you sure I should be the one introducing you? Like, I don't want to tread on any toes." And he said, "Kerrie, there are no toes. Just do it." And I call that my step up moment, because I think in the back of my head was this voice saying, like, I'm just a country girl. Like, how do I get these opportunities? And now I can say it's, because of my passion. I'd drive to Sydney for an event, or I'd fly, and people in Sydney, like my peers, would say, "Oh my gosh, you're so committed." We complained about 40 minutes of traffic and you came all this way. And so I think being a country girl was actually an advantage. I stood out, and I was just passionate. So that I'm just a country girl, that fell away when I'm standing in front of, 100 Singaporean business people and just sharing my passion. It was extraordinary.
So from a travelling point of view, this is really interesting to understand, I guess, the cultural significance of that, in terms of, your immediate audience was, and what you were used to was your Australian audience, and then all of a sudden here you were in Singapore, amongst a completely different culture. And as you say, when you talk about don't talk to strangers, I started smiling, because having lived in Singapore for a number of years, that resonated. But I guess in terms of how was that for you, first of all? Did you feel like a fish out of water with that audience because of the different cultural mindset?
No, there was a couple of things David said. Make sure you ask them to turn off their cell phone or their hand phone. We don't say mobile phone here. I was like, okay, great. But I'd already been mentoring coaches there in Singapore, and I got to meet a coach that I mentored, and another lady who was her client, who had an extraordinary story, and and it helped them with the publishing of their book, of the client's book. And so I already had relationships with the people.
What inspired the book Do Talk to Strangers? Was there a particular epiphany around that as well?
Well, it kind of was a growing thing, because people would say to me, "How do you have an international business when you're from Dubbo?" And I'm like, "Yeah, well, I guess it's just talking to people." And the other thing was that I would come home from a trip, maybe to Sydney, and I would say, I met this like amazing guy on the train, and then I got an email from this guy who's the CEO of this company, and then this other CEO rang me, and they both said, like, "Jeffrey said you'd be a good person for me to know." And I was like, our purpose is bigger than our fear. Then all of that nervousness disappears, and we just step forward into what we feel compelled to do. And sometimes, I'd look back and go, "Oh my gosh, did I do that?" I didn't think I had the confidence to do that, but I just went and did it because it was important, because these people matter. And so it's really my passion for people that brought that out. And a lot of people asking me questions and telling me that I have to write this book.
Have you got a couple of favourite conversation starters when you meet a stranger?
I think one great thing can be commenting on something else, like a shared experience, like, "Oh my gosh, isn't that stunning?" If you're looking at this beautiful view, you're on the train, going over the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, what a perfect day in the harbour." And so it's not about the other person, so they don't feel like interrogated, and they can just go, "Oh yeah, that's really cool." And then, "What are you looking forward to this weekend?" Or like, "What do you do for fun in Sydney on a weekend?" And so, just questions that put a smile on people's faces. That really takes the pressure off. If I'm not asking them to be correct about something, if I'm asking their opinion, like, what's their favourite cafe, or, if you ask people for their own personal recommendations, they often love that. Everyone's got a favourite cafe or restaurant around the corner. And, I've had people stop me in the street and just go, "Excuse me, who does your hair?" It can just be those little things that, if people feel that you're sincere, then they're so happy to connect. But if they feel like it's a line, like you've been practicing and you're like, you want to get something, then they're wary. But if it's just a shared moment of joy or an interest in something that matters to them, they're so happy.
What about the importance of listening when you're starting a conversation with strangers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and also being willing to share something of yourself, because this brings to mind when I was with Jane at Scarborough Beach, and we'd just come back from this walk, and we ran into another friend, and her son was fishing. And then this lady came along, and she was I mean, she's possibly very much a local, but she was, of Asian appearance, and which didn't occur to me at all. She just said, "Oh, how's the fishing?" And I said, "Oh, we've just, come back from a walk. I don't know." And I said, "Oh, do you live around here?" Because there's all these beautiful houses along this strip that just overlook the beach, and it's sunset. And this is early days of me discovering Perth and sunsets over the ocean. I'm just like, wow. But as I said, "Oh, do you live around here?" She just kind of looked threatened, and then so I said, "Oh, I'm from Central West New South Wales, so I just think this is amazing." And then she visibly relaxed, and I thought, now is it because of her appearance that people might, judge her as an outsider? Like, where are you from? Well, maybe she's from Perth. Maybe she's always lived in Perth. And so we don't know what triggers people have. And so, if we ask a question that sort of takes someone off guard, that, they look a bit threatened, we need to say why, like, "Oh, sorry, I was just curious because," and share why you're curious, or, so you can diffuse that tension. And so I think that's kind of a visual listening, seeing that someone hasn't resonated with what you've said, and to offer something of yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. What countries, I'm interested to know what countries you've visited where you feel as though strangers are more open to start a conversation with you. Is there one that sort of sticks out?
Probably Spain. Or, well, to greet you anyway. Like, I think it really depends on language, and people can be like, smile and wave, but we might not be able to, have a shared language. But I really find that people are open kind of everywhere I've been, even if they tell me that they're not. Probably Brunei was the most closed, and that was fascinating.
So what do you do in that situation where you're in a country where you find it difficult to connect at that level, and do you keep pursuing it, or do you kind of just respect it and say, okay, well, I won't push as hard to get people to have a conversation with me?
Yeah, I would like to leave people better than I found them. So, so I might just say, like, "Oh, I hope you don't mind. I just noticed, I really liked what you're wearing, or, I'm really enjoying this city." So I just will make it more about me if they look like they're pressured that I've made something about them. If they look like they're feeling conspicuous. And it's just kind of like, "Oh, I'm just loving this." This is why I'm just like talking to strangers, because I'm like, I'm just so happy, so happy to be here. But I found in Brunei, some people were they thought it was weird that I'd be happy to be there, because I think they, hadn't really traveled. And one guy who actually worked in tourism said to me, "Don't come back here. Don't bring your husband and son for a holiday. It's boring, boring, boring." And I was like, wow, like, here's me going, here's this amazing coastline, and you've only got one resort, and the rest of the highway goes past with like trees in between you and the ocean. It's like, you're not even seeing how stunning this is. And then I got on the flight back to Singapore, and there was this TV show, and I didn't have sound because I said no thanks to the headphones. Then they have this little screen pop down, and it was, like a getaway travel TV show where they have 10 days of different adventures in Brunei. And I was like, man, this is fascinating, just watching it and just reading, the subtitles when they came up. I was like, no, it's beautiful. And so I think worldwide people have different perceptions of what their place is like.
Yeah.
Some people love where they're from and are so happy to talk about it, and others are mystified that you'd be interested.
That's why I asked you to explain Dubbo in the beginning of the show today, because often when those of us who spend a lot of time traveling overseas, they forget about what's in their own backyard a lot.
That's right. And there's so many people that do tree changes. They come from Sydney, move out to the country, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And people smile and say hello down the street.
Yeah. Has there been any situations, or can you give us any examples where your Australian accent has been a help or a hindrance in starting a conversation with a stranger?
Sometimes people say I have an English accent, and I was like, oh my gosh, my grandma would be so proud. And my son tells me I have a refined Australian accent as opposed to a broad Australian accent. So sometimes people don't pick it straight away, but they'll ask where I'm from. And you know what? I think in France, I found people tell me, they were telling me before I went, that you better not try the talking to strangers thing in France because people don't want to talk to strangers. And I was like, okay, we'll see. And people said, like, make sure you've got an Australian flag on your backpack, or, if they can see you're from Australia, then they'll be nice to you. But, and I didn't go to that trouble, but I found, like, one day I had to get a bus and the bus just wasn't there. And I was like, am I even in the right place? And so I was like, excuse me, can you please help me find the bus to San Sebastian? And there was 2 guys there, and one guy just looked terrified to be like asked anything, I think because he didn't really have any English. But another one, he was just, he was just open, and he didn't really speak English either. And I just think that sometimes we assume that a certain place is not friendly, but that's just based on, an encounter here or there. But, mostly wherever we go, a smile opens a door of opportunity. And for some people, they might have an association with a certain accent, and they go like, are you from Australia? I've got a friend from there. And then the doors open, of course, if somebody has an association with that country, a positive one.
Do you speak other languages other than English?
No, just kind of hellos. So, but that can be quite amazing when you say konnichiwa or, salamat, just little phrases. People will be like, oh, wow. And they're happy to speak in English pretty much wherever you go.
Is it something you'd like to do, given the field you're in, and shooting off around the world, doing all this stuff? Is it I was just reading the other day that Spanish is a more spoken language around the world now than English.
I heard you say that on a podcast like this morning, and then I said it to my husband because he was learning Spanish. Because he walked across Spain, and which is how I ended up in Europe and going to all these places by myself. I don't know if I told you, but I called it the hashtag Do Talk to Strangers Europe Tour, because I'm like, I don't know what to do while he's walking across Spain for 6 weeks. So I'm just going to go and meet people in other countries and put myself out of the comfort zone, because I felt like I was getting a bit comfortable with Asia. It's like that's kind of easy now. Not that, all the countries that I go to, they're all so different. But Europe, I was like, okay, what's it going to be like in Germany, where maybe people don't speak a lot of English? Yeah. So I told him that about Spanish, and he was like, yeah. He says, I remember learning that too. So he's learned some Spanish, and he sings things, and sometimes says romantic things to me in Spanish. And
That you have no idea what he's saying.
I've picked up things here and there, but I honestly...
You better double check what he's telling you,
I honestly don't know what language I would start with, because I really love people from so many different countries, and then in India they speak different languages, and and people want to speak English in a lot of places, so I'm kind of off the hook there. But I do think it's lovely if we can learn something of where we're going. But when I went from a week in France to Spain, I'd gotten used to like the French greetings and thank yous and all of that. And then even though Spanish I'd been exposed to more at home, I just had to pause, because first of all there's the English, like I want to say, hello, how are you? Then there's the French version of that. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, how do I say it in Spain? I just completely forgotten. So going from one country to another, like with a few days in each country, was, really quite confusing. So.
Well, I'm going to give you a tip today, Kerrie, on how to quickly learn a language, okay? So all the flights you take overseas from Australia, they're typically, 8 hours or more, and unless you're going to New Zealand, of course. And on all the in-flight entertainment systems, you can actually sit back and learn a language as you're flying along to Singapore or Brunei or wherever you're going next. And within a few trips, you'll be surprised how much you can actually pick up from learning a language. So there's a tip for you. Pick up some Spanish, and then you better come home and say something to your husband and surprise the heck out of him.
Yeah, Spanish is probably a good one to learn.
Now, I've often said to people that writing a book is like a travel experience from hell. And it's a kind of analogy I use, because if people haven't written a book who are listening today, you probably won't get it. But I guess it's a case of, it's really a journey in writing a book. How did you find the journey of writing books that you've written?
People say that when they've got multiple children, that they're all very different, and I only have one. So, but in terms of books, they're all very different. So my first book was like one very intense week, And, it's really a chapter about journaling and the power of thoughts and words and writing things down. And then it was like formatting, with one of my clients who was a graphic designer. But it was a very intense week. And then the next one was a collaborative work, which is lifting the lid on quiet achievers. It's success stories of regional entrepreneurs. So I'm wanting to put the spotlight on regional Australia because of those questions people asked me, like, how do you do this from Dubbo? And I'm like, you know what, we've got the internet, we've got like an airport 5 minutes from home. We can do things in the country. And I wanted to encourage,
and we
other
talk
people
English
that
out
had
here.
that voice in their head, like, I'm just a country girl, or, I'm just, remote or whatever. And so that book was 6 months super intense as I was interviewing everybody, working with a publisher, and time frames kept changing. So yeah, it wasn't fun at all. We had, many nights editing all the way through so that we could get to a deadline the next morning. And then Do Talk to Strangers was like, just took forever, and I felt like, is this ever going to happen? Because I was living the book. I'm traveling and meeting people and talking about the book, but not really getting it done. And so that was a 2.5-year project, and then, but really intensified in the last 6 months. And then the latest, which is the Do Talk to Strangers travel toolkit, I did that in 3 weeks because, and it's a much smaller book. It's like half the size physically, well, a bit less, but it's kind of bit bigger than a passport size. I wanted it to literally be a travel toolkit, so you can take it without burdening your luggage down any further, because I talk about traveling light. And that was 3 weeks because I'd been carrying it around in my head for a year. I'd been telling people about it, but not actually putting any pen to paper. And then I thought, you know what, it would be great to launch this at the HR Summit in Singapore, where I'd emceed the year before in the main stage. There's about 2,500 people. And my book, Do Talk to Strangers, was the biggest seller from the bookstore in the Suntec Stadium. And so I thought, it's a good time to launch another book. So I was like, oh my gosh, that means I need to do it in 3 weeks, and then, which included the design time, so that we'd have a week for the printers in Singapore to print it. That was intense. And because I announced it in front of an audience in Sydney, because I said when I get back from Singapore, I'll do a launch with them. And then after the event, I went on Facebook Live with the audience and announced to Facebook World that I'm doing this book, and it's going to be out in Singapore, and I'll do a special launch event at a client's office, a few days after the conferences. And that's how my husband knew that I was doing this book. He saw it on Facebook Live and he was like, what? Because he's like, it's not just something that, the author does. It's like the whole family is involved.
Did he say something to you in Spanish then when you told him that?
I think there were a few emojis. And and he said that, what he actually said, he didn't put on Facebook. And I was like, I'm sorry about that. It just was like, I was so inspired and I went, I've got to do this. And then coming back from India just recently, the one that was kind of, back in the queue, it jumped forward to the queue, and I went, I've just got to write this now. And so I'm collaborating with people again, and getting their stories about talking to strangers to decrease anxiety and to build confidence and to make a bigger difference in the world. And everybody's got stories of connection that relate to those three things. Sometimes it's just this moment of connection where you just see somebody's anxiety just diminish. It's like, we can be relieved just to know that somebody else has seen what we've seen, or has the answer to something. Like if we're totally lost, like I was in Germany in this massive train station, it just went on forever, and I'm like, I've got 2 minutes to get to this train. And it was just, I didn't understand any of the signage, and it's like all big words, like all the towns were like big words I just didn't understand, and I can't find where I've got to go. And this girl just runs ahead of me to get me to platform 14B or C, and we found it, and I got on the train with seconds to spare, and I was like, thank you so much. And I thought, she doesn't know how important that was. That was the first of 4 train trips that day. So it's like I would not have got to Dresden, and I would have just cancelled that whole part of the trip to meet a stranger from Arizona who'd connected with me on LinkedIn a couple of weeks earlier. So it was like crazy, but strangers helped me in little ways. And so
there you go, amazing. What's your favourite business book out there at the moment?
One that the first one that came to mind just then, and it's one that I keep thinking of the title, and that is Insanely Simple, the obsession that drives Apple's success. And so it was written by a guy who worked with Steve Jobs over years, like from the early days and then later on as well. And he said, people would start talking about something and it would get complicated, and then Steve would hit them with his simple stick. It'd just be like, you don't need 3, you just need 1. And just constantly simplifying things. And I just relate to that because I can just complicate things in my head. And you just go, you know what? What's the essence of this? Let's just come back to that. So yeah, it's a book I found it really easy to read, but I also just really love the concept. Like,
insanely simple. Okay. Are you someone that meditates?
Yeah.
You do? Yeah. Meditate daily?
Pretty much.
Yep.
Yeah. Not.
How long have you been meditating for? How long has it been part of your
years,
life?
And probably since I was really sick 15 years ago. And I don't know if I would have called it that, but it was just being really still and meditative, I guess. And being very aware of my thinking. It really transformed my husband's life, and that's another conversation. But because he went from like not at all to doing it all the time, and he was using the Headspace app, and I think it's so brilliantly put together. Have you seen the Headspace app?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah,
it is good.
But I think growing up on a farm, and I got really busy in life, and then burnout. It was quite a gift to me to just still my mind, to be quiet, and writing has been a really good practice also.
What makes you laugh at yourself?
Sometimes like silly things, and I remember like a couple of times where, because I used to just beat myself up so much. Like if I did something stupid, I just would be like, oh, this is so stupid. I don't know if you've listened to my latest podcast that is about laughing at yourself, but I had this moment at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, and I was talking to this lawyer, and he was like just so beautifully put together, and we're at the drinks table, and I picked up the orange juice, and I thought the lid was on it, and I just went to shake it, and it just shook everywhere, like all across the table, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I've got a serviette, and he just like slunk away, like I had nothing to do with this. And it was just really interesting, because I was like, wow, yeah, we can just be totally embarrassed about things like this, or we can just go, man, that was just like a silly thing to do. And I just found it liberating to be able to laugh at myself with little things, because if somebody else made that mistake, we'd just be like, oh, don't worry about it. Or we'd just see the funny side of it and just go like, whoa, did you see how far that orange juice went? But, to have to be also tightly composed and, all together, that is such a pressure. And I think once I became really sick, I was like, I just had no energy for pretense. So it's like, you know what, this is just me. I've just got to be myself, because it's the most, functional way I can be. There's no energy to put the professional walls up.
What one tip of advice would you give someone listening today who wants to become a coach in any area?
First thing is like become really curious, and know that no two brains are remotely alike. And so when you can ask people questions without trying to get them to a certain place, but just to be curious about where they're going to take the conversation, and because it means putting your ego aside too. It's like, you know what, I really have nothing to do with what my clients are accomplishing. It's like, it's very humbling. But to be willing to really help people unpack their own genius, and to be willing to work with somebody yourself. I would always recommend, if you want to be a coach, then get a coach.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah, because a lot of people actually do training, and years later they might be talking to me about, I just want my coaching business to go forward. And I'm like, how long since you've worked with a coach? Oh, I haven't really been coached myself. It's like, wow. If I'm going to a massage therapist, I want to know that they know what it's like to be on the table.
Yeah.
And go, man, that's a really tight spot,
Especially if they've got long nails.
Because, coaching is a bit like having a massage. Sometimes you ask a question, and you ask great questions that really, can unpack insight. And so sometimes those questions make you go, oh, I just want to kind of squirm off the edge of the table. But there's something that I know I could see here if I stay and just be honest with myself. So you've got to be a client as well as being a coach.
Great tip. Kerrie, we've rushed through our time today. It's been fantastic, and I feel like I've travelled the world with you in lots of different dimensions. But before I let you go today, I'd like to ask you one last thing, and that is how's all the travel that you've experienced, whether it be from the time that you took those family holidays in the car with your family to your most recent travels overseas, how's that all changed and added to your life experience?
Oh, it's changed my life extraordinarily, because I think the more we travel, even if it's traveling around our neighbourhood and encountering people, being willing to talk to people, to talk to strangers that we don't understand, rather than just trying to make assumptions to understand, but to be curious and open to learn from people, it expands our world. And I think it builds our empathy. It's just changed my world in so many ways. And also it's really enlarged my world for making a bigger difference. How can I serve and support? So a lot of countries I've gone to have been just to go in service, going at my own cost to work with entrepreneurs and education leaders, seeing how much a little investment and involvement with someone can make a big difference in their life, whether it's in their community or from afar. But we can make a bigger difference if we just start tuning in to how can we serve the world, or how can we serve this community or this person who's making a difference in their community. So yeah, it's been absolutely world changing.
Well, folks, my guest today has been Kerrie Phipps. Kerrie is an international speaker, leadership coach and author. You're going to be able to check out all her links in the show notes today and get her latest book, listen to her podcast show, and Kerrie's going to be back sometime in the future because we've got a lot more to talk about that we didn't get to today. But Kerrie, thank you very much for joining me on the Global Travel Channel podcast show today.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you, Mark.
There we are, folks. That was Kerrie Phipps talking to me from Dubbo in New South Wales. Hurry up and book your ticket to Dubbo because it's going to become a tourist mecca after everybody listens to the show, and you won't be able to get a hotel room in Dubbo anymore. So there we go, folks. If you're listening to the show somewhere around the world and you've been to Dubbo, can you please drop me a note and let me know? I'd love to find that information out. Now then, so Kerrie has been to lots of different places for lots of different reasons, whether it be for her work as writing a book, as a leadership coach, or as somebody who has spoken in different countries around the world. I hope you enjoyed listening to Kerrie's stories and the impact that travel has had on her life. If you're looking for more episodes from the Global Travel Channel, all you've got to do is head on over to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. There you'll find over 130 plus episodes of inspiring guests who share all their travel related stories. Who knows, it might just change your life, or it might give you something new in terms of a direction or a place to go and visit. All sorts of outcomes happen from this particular show. Okay, well that's it for another episode. If you've enjoyed it and you love Kerrie as a guest, don't forget to vote for Kerrie. Yes, you can do that for the 2019-2020 Global Travel Channel Podcast Awards. All you need to do is go to our website, click on the awards page, and then vote for Kerrie. There's lots of different categories that you can vote for Kerrie. You have one vote per category. And on June the 9th, I will be announcing the winners of the first inaugural Global Travel Channel Podcast Show Awards. Exciting times ahead, folks. And if you love our podcast in general, tell a friend, tell a family member, or even tell a work colleague on the other side of the world. We'd like to get more and more people listening to the show. We want to crack the big 100 countries for downloads. We're at 97 at the moment, so can you help us with that one perhaps? Okay, well that's it for this episode. My name is Mark Philpott. I look forward to the next time that we can all be together on a podcast show with the Global Travel Channel. Until then, be safe and be happy.